Snow fell heavily on Boston streets that December night, creating a white blanket that muffled the city's sounds. The cutting wind from the North Atlantic blew between the red brick buildings of the North End, carrying with it the familiar aroma of tomato sauce and garlic emanating from the area's Italian restaurants. It was a typical New England winter night, where the cold penetrated to the bone and people hurried to reach their heated homes. Vincent Vinnie Torino drove his black Cadillac Escalade through the empty streets of Route 1, returning from a business meeting in Revere. At 45, Vinnie was an imposing figure in Boston's underworld, a man of medium stature, but with a presence that commanded instant respect. His graying hair was slicked back with gel, and his dark eyes carried the wisdom and hardness of someone who had seen too much in life. Wearing an Italian wool overcoat over an impeccably tailored suit, he was the embodiment of the silent power that moved behind the city's scenes. The car's heater was running at maximum, but even so, Vinnie could feel the cold seeping through the windows. He adjusted the rearview mirror and checked the clock on the dashboard. 11:47 p.m. His wife, Maria, was probably already asleep in their Beacon Hill mansion, and his 2 adult children were taking care of their own business. The night's solitude made him reflect on the choices he had made over the years, the bridges he had burned, and the lives he had touched, not always positively. It was then that his car's headlights illuminated something that made him brake abruptly. On the right side of the road, near an abandoned bus stop, a small figure was sitting on the curb. Even from a distance, Vinnie could see it was a child, and the muffled sound of crying reached his ears through the closed glass. "What the hell?" murmured Vinnie, stopping the car on the shoulder and turning on the hazard lights. He got out of the vehicle, immediately feeling the icy wind cut his face. The snow crunched under his Italian leather shoes as he approached the child. It was a boy, appearing to be about 8 years old, wearing only a thin t-shirt, torn jeans, and worn sneakers. His blonde hair was wet from melted snow, and his small body trembled violently from the cold. "Hey, kid," said Vinnie, crouching down to the child's level. His voice, normally rough and authoritative, came out surprisingly soft. "What are you doing here alone?" The boy lifted his face, revealing blue eyes swollen from crying and cheeks red from the cold. There was something in that gaze that touched a long-forgotten part of Vinnie's heart, a pure vulnerability that contrasted dramatically with the world of violence and betrayal in which he lived. I got lost," sobbed the boy, his voice trembling. "My mom said she'd come back, but she didn't come back. It's been a long time." Vinnie looked around. The road was completely deserted, with no signs of other cars or people. The nearest gas station was at least 3 kilometers away, and there were no residences in sight. How had a child ended up in this remote place? "How long have you been here?" asked Vinnie, taking off his overcoat and wrapping the boy in it. The coat was too big, completely swallowing the child's fragile figure. "I don't know," replied the boy, clinging to the warm fabric. "It was dark when she left me here. She said she was going to get something and would be right back." Vinnie's mind quickly processed the possibilities. A mother doesn't simply abandon a child on a deserted road in the middle of a snowstorm unless she was desperate or in danger, or worse, unless she had no choice. "What's your name, kid?" asked Vinnie, helping the boy stand up. "Tommy," replied the child, still shivering. "Tommy Morrison." "All right, Tommy. My name is Vinnie. I'm going to take you somewhere warm, okay? You must be freezing." Tommy nodded vigorously, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. Vinnie picked him up. The boy weighed almost nothing, as if he hadn't eaten in days, and carried him to the Escalade. He turned the heat to maximum and grabbed a water bottle from the glove compartment. "Drink slowly," instructed Vinnie, watching Tommy drink the water as if it were the first in hours. "When was the last time you ate something?" Tommy stopped drinking and thought for a moment. "Yesterday morning, I think. My mom gave me a sandwich." Vinnie's heart tightened. He had seen many things in his years in organized crime: betrayals, violence, death. But there was something about this child's innocence that affected him in a way he couldn't explain. Maybe it was because it reminded him of his own children when they were small. Or maybe it was because he recognized in Tommy something he had lost long ago. the ability to completely trust another person. "Listen, Tommy," said Vinny, adjusting the heat. "I'm going to take you to my house. My wife will take care of you, give you hot food and dry clothes. Tomorrow we'll figure out where your mom is, okay? Do you promise?" asked Tommy, his blue eyes shining with a mixture of hope and fear. "I promise," replied Vinny, and for the first time in years, he really meant it. As he drove through Boston's streets toward Beacon Hill, Vinny couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror at Tommy, who had fallen asleep in the back seat, still wrapped in his overcoat. The child seemed so small and fragile, so different from the brutal world Vinny lived in daily. Beacon Hill was one of Boston's most exclusive neighborhoods, with its historic red brick houses, cobblestone streets, and gas lamp that created an almost Victorian atmosphere. Vinny's mansion was on Louisburg Square, one of the area's most prestigious locations, where politicians, businessmen, and other influential figures maintained their residences. When they arrived at the house, an imposing 4-story construction with sash windows and a black painted front door, Vinny carefully carried Tommy so as not to wake him. The boy murmured something unintelligible in his sleep, instinctively clinging to Vinny's shirt. Maria Torino was in the kitchen preparing tea when she heard the front door open. At 42, she maintained the Mediterranean beauty that had won Vinny 25 years ago, with wavy dark hair and expressive brown eyes. Wearing a navy blue silk robe, she headed to the entrance hall, expecting to find only her husband. "Vincent, you're home earlier than—" She stopped mid-sentence upon seeing her husband carrying a sleeping child. "My God, who is this child?" "It's a long story, Maria," said Vinny in a low voice, going up the stairs toward the guest room. "I'll explain everything after we put him to bed." Maria followed her husband, her mind racing with questions. In all their years of marriage, she had learned not to immediately question Vinny's decisions, especially when they involved his work. But a child was something completely different. The guest room was decorated in shades of blue and white, with a queen-sized bed and dark wood furniture. Vinny gently placed Tommy on the bed, removing his wet sneakers and covering him with a thick blanket. The boy sighed in his sleep, finally relaxing after hours of tension and fear. "He was alone on Route 1, explained Vinny in whispers as they went down to the kitchen. "Abandoned in the middle of a snowstorm. He said his mother left him there and promised to come back." Maria served 2 cups of tea and sat at the solid oak table that dominated the kitchen. "Vincent, you know we can't simply bring a child home without notifying the authorities." "I know," replied Vinny, running his hand through his hair. "But you should have seen him, Maria. He was freezing, hungry, completely alone. I couldn't just leave him there." Maria studied her husband's face. In all their years of marriage, she had rarely seen him display this kind of emotional vulnerability. Vinny was a man who controlled his emotions with an iron fist, who made calculated decisions based on logic and self-interest. Seeing this more human side of him was both comforting and worrying. "What if it's a trap?" asked Maria. "You have many enemies, Vincent. What if someone is using this child to get to you?" Maria's question was valid. In Vinny's world, paranoia wasn't a mental illness. It was a survival tool. He had built his empire by being cautious, distrusting everyone, and always thinking 3 steps ahead of his adversaries. "I thought about that," admitted Vinny. "But you should have seen his eyes, Maria. There was no pretense there. It was pure fear, real desperation." Maria sighed, knowing that when her husband made a decision based on instinct, he rarely changed his mind. "What do you plan to do?" "Tomorrow I'll make some calls, find out who Tommy Morrison is and what happened to his mother. But for now, he stays here. He's safe, warm, and fed." They drank their tea in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Upstairs, Tommy slept deeply for the first time in days, unaware that he had just entered the life of one of Boston's most dangerous men, and that this entry would change both their destinies forever. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city with a blanket of purity that ironically contrasted with the dark secrets hiding in the shadows of its historic streets. Dawn came silently to Boston, bringing with it a gray sky that promised more snow. The city awakened slowly under the previous night's white blanket, with the first workers already removing snow from sidewalks and MBTA buses carefully navigating the slippery streets. In the north end, the aroma of espresso and fresh bread began emanating from Italian bakeries, signaling the start of another day in the Massachusetts capital. In the Torino mansion on Beacon Hill, Tommy Morrison woke up disoriented, blinking several times before recognizing the luxurious environment around him. The room was larger than the entire apartment where he lived with his mother, with heavy curtains that blocked most of the morning light and furniture that seemed to have come out of a movie. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, but the sensation of warmth and safety was too real to be imagination. The smell of fried bacon and scrambled eggs reached his nose, making his stomach growl loudly. Tommy got up from the bed, still wearing the damp clothes from the previous night, and walked to the window. Below, he could see a snow-covered garden with century-old trees and a stone fountain that had transformed into an ice sculpture during the night. A gentle knock on the door made him turn around. Maria Torino entered the room carrying a tray with food and a set of clean clothes. She had spent the night awake, worried about the unusual situation, but one look at Tommy's innocent face was enough to melt any initial resistance. "Good morning, dear," said Maria with a warm smile, placing the tray on the dresser. "Did you sleep well?" Tommy nodded shyly, still processing where he was and how he had gotten there. "Are you Mr. Vinny's wife?" "Yes, I am. My name is Maria, and you must be very hungry." She pointed to the tray, which contained scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, buttered toast, fresh orange juice, and a glass of warm milk. "Eat everything you want, then we'll find clothes that fit you." While Tommy devoured breakfast, the first proper meal in days, Maria observed his every movement. The child ate with the urgency of someone who didn't know when the next opportunity would come, but still maintained good manners, thanking with each bite. There was something in the boy's upbringing that suggested careful raising, despite the precarious circumstances in which he was found. "Tommy," said Maria gently, sitting on the edge of the bed, "can you tell me a little about your mother? What's her name?" Tommy's face darkened slightly. "Sarah Morrison. She worked at a restaurant downtown, but she lost her job a few weeks ago." "And your father?" "I never met him," replied Tommy, lowering his eyes. "My mom said he left before I was born." Maria felt her heart tighten. The story was becoming clearer. A single mother, unemployed, probably desperate. But that still didn't explain why she had abandoned her son on a deserted road. At that moment, Vinny appeared in the bedroom doorway. He had changed from the previous night's suit to more casual clothes, dark jeans and a gray wool sweater. But his presence still commanded respect. Tommy smiled upon seeing him, a reaction that surprised both Vinny and Maria. "How are you feeling today, champ?" asked Vinny, using a tone his associates had never heard. "Much better, thank you for helping me," replied Tommy, finishing the last piece of bacon. "Are you going to help me find my mom?" Vinny exchanged a meaningful look with Maria before responding. "I'll do everything I can, Tommy, but first I need to make some calls, okay? Meanwhile, Maria will take care of you." Vinny went down to his office on the first floor, an environment that perfectly reflected his personality. Dark leather furniture, shelves full of books on Italian and American history, and a solid mahogany desk where he conducted both legitimate and illegitimate business. The walls were decorated with old photographs of Boston and some Renaissance paintings he had acquired over the years. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. On the other end of the line, a rough voice answered on the second ring. "Sal's Investigations." "Sal, it's Vinny. I need you to do a search for me. Urgent. Salvatore." Sal Benedetto was a former Boston police detective who had retired early after a corruption scandal. Now he worked as a private investigator, specializing in cases that the official police preferred to ignore. His relationship with Vinny was mutually beneficial. Sal provided information, and Vinny ensured he remained in operation. "Sure, Vinny. What do you need?" "A woman named Sarah Morrison. Worked in downtown restaurants. Has an 8-year-old son named Tommy. I want to know everything. Where she lives, financial situation, criminal history, associations, everything." How much time do I have? Until the end of the day. And Sal, be discreet. I don't want anyone to know I'm looking for her. Understood. I'll call you as soon as I have something. Vinny hung up the phone and leaned back in the leather chair. There was something about the whole situation that bothered him, a feeling that he was missing some important piece of the puzzle. In his years in organized crime, he had learned to trust his instincts, and they were screaming that there was more to this story than it appeared. Meanwhile, upstairs, Maria had found some clothes that belonged to Vinny's youngest son when he was a child. Although they were a bit big for Tommy, they would do until they could buy appropriate clothes. The boy took a hot shower, the first in days, and dressed in jeans and a blue t-shirt that made him look like a normal child, not a boy abandoned found on the roadside. Much better, said Maria, combing Tommy's blonde hair. Now you look like a real young gentleman. Tommy smiled, feeling more human than he had felt in weeks. Mrs. Maria, can I ask something? Of course, dear. Mr. Vinny is an important man, isn't he? This house is very big, and he has a very nice car. Maria hesitated for a moment. How to explain to an 8-year-old child that her husband was one of the most powerful figures in Boston's organized crime? Yes, he's a very successful businessman. He works with import and export. It was a half-truth. Vinny really had legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction companies, some real estate properties. But most of his income came from less legal activities, illegal gambling, loans with abusive interest, and a small participation in drug trafficking that he controlled with an iron fist. The office phone rang around 3 in the afternoon. Vinny answered immediately, recognizing Sal's number. What did you find out? Vinny, this story is more complicated than you imagine, said Sal, his voice loaded with concern. Sarah Morrison, 28 years old, single mother, worked as a waitress at Bella Vista, that Italian restaurant on Hanover Street. I know the place. Continue. She was fired 3 weeks ago for missing work too much. Apparently she was having serious personal problems. Lived in an apartment in Southie, but was evicted last week for non-payment. Vinny frowned. South Boston was a traditionally Irish neighborhood, but it had become more diverse over the years. Still, it was an area where a single mother with financial problems could easily get into trouble. There's more, continued Sal. She owed money to some wrong people, Mickey O'Sullivan and his crew. Vinny's blood ran cold. Mickey O'Sullivan was an Irish loan shark who operated in Southie, known for his brutality and lack of patience with defaulting debtors. If Sarah Morrison owed money to Mickey, that explained a lot. How much did she owe? $15,000. Started with 5, but with Mickey's compound interest. Son of a bitch, murmured Vinny. And the boy, here's where it gets interesting. I couldn't find any birth record for Tommy Morrison in Massachusetts. In fact, I couldn't find any official record of him anywhere. Vinny straightened in his chair. What does that mean? It means either he was born in another state and the records weren't transferred, or, Sal made a significant pause, or he's not who he says he is. Keep investigating. I want to know everything about Sarah Morrison in the last 6 months. Where she's been, who she talked to, what kind of problems she had besides money. Vinny, there's one more thing. Sarah Morrison was last seen 3 days ago, getting into a car with 2 men who work for Mickey. Nobody's seen her since then. The silence that followed was heavy. Vinny knew Mickey O'Sullivan's reputation. If Sarah had been taken by him, the chances of her being alive were minimal. And if she was dead, Tommy was officially an orphan. Sal, I want you to stop the investigation for now. And don't mention this to anyone. Nobody. Understood, Vinny. But be careful. If Mickey finds out you're involved in this, leave Mickey to me, said Vinny, hanging up the phone. He leaned back in his chair, processing the information. Tommy wasn't just an abandoned child. He was potentially an orphaned child without official documents, and son of a woman who had gotten involved with very dangerous people. The situation had become infinitely more complicated. Vinny went upstairs and found Tommy in the living room, watching cartoons on the big screen television, while Maria prepared dinner in the kitchen. The boy seemed so normal, so innocent, completely oblivious to the dark world that had infiltrated his life. Tommy, said Vinny, sitting next to him on the leather sofa. I need to ask some questions about your mother." Tommy turned off the television and turned to Vinny, his blue eyes full of hope. "Did you find her?" "Not yet, but I'm looking. Do you remember your mother mentioning any problems? Someone who was bothering her or asking for money?" Tommy's face darkened. "There were some men who came to the house sometimes. They talked loudly with my mom, and she always got very nervous afterward. She sent me to my room when they showed up. Do you remember what they looked like? One of them was very big, with red hair. The other was shorter, but had a scar on his face." Tommy touched his own cheek to show where the scar was. Vinny knew that description. Seamus Red Murphy and Danny Scar Flanagan, two of Mickey O'Sullivan's most brutal thugs. If they were visiting Sarah Morrison, the situation was even worse than he had imagined. "Tommy, I want you to listen to me carefully," said Vinny, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. "It might take a while to find your mother. Meanwhile, you're going to stay here with us. Is that okay?" Tommy nodded, but Vinny could see worry growing in his eyes. "She's in danger, isn't she?" The question caught Vinny off guard. There was a maturity in Tommy's tone that didn't match his age, as if he had already seen too much for a child. "I don't know yet," replied Vinny honestly, "but I promise I'll find out the truth." That night, after Tommy went to sleep, Vinny and Maria talked in the privacy of their bedroom. The decoration was elegant but cozy, with gold and brown tones that created a warm atmosphere. Maria was sitting at her vanity, removing makeup, while Vinny looked out the window at the illuminated streets of Beacon Hill. "Vincent, what did you find out about his mother?" asked Maria, watching her husband's reflection in the mirror. Vinny told everything Sal had discovered, watching Maria's expression change from concern to horror as the story unfolded. "My God," whispered Maria, "that poor woman. What if she's—" "I know," interrupted Vinny. "I'm trying not to think about that yet. And Tommy, if something happened to his mother, what are we going to do?" It was the question Vinny had avoided facing all day. If Sarah Morrison was dead, Tommy would become the state's responsibility. He would be placed in the adoption system, probably spend years jumping from foster family to foster family, carrying the trauma of abandonment and loss. "I don't know," admitted Vinny, "but I can't simply hand him over to social services. Not after everything he's been through." Maria turned to face her husband. "Vincent, are you talking about adoption?" "I'm talking about doing the right thing," replied Vinny. "That boy has nobody in the world. If we don't take care of him, who will?" It was a conversation they had never imagined having. Their own children were already adults, and they had gotten used to the freedom that came with an empty nest. But there was something about Tommy that had touched both of them in a deep and unexpected way. "You know our life isn't exactly suitable for raising a child," said Maria carefully. "Your work, the risks." "I know," replied Vinny, "but maybe it's time to make some changes." Outside, the snow had stopped falling, but the cold continued intense. In the streets of South Boston, Mickey O'Sullivan was in his office in the back of an Irish bar, planning his next move. He still didn't know that Tommy Morrison was under Vincent Torino's protection, but when he found out, the situation would become much more dangerous for everyone involved. The night promised to be long, and the events that would unfold in the next hours would change the course of several lives forever. Tommy's third day at the Torino mansion began with a call that Vinny had been both expecting and dreading. It was 6 in the morning when the phone rang in his office, interrupting the morning silence that hung over Beacon Hill. Vinny answered on the first ring, already instinctively knowing the news wouldn't be good. "Vinny, it's Sal. I need to see you in person, now." "What happened?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at Cafe Vittoria in an hour." The line went dead, leaving Vinny with a dark foreboding in his stomach. Sal Benedetto wasn't a man to dramatize situations, and his urgency suggested that the investigation into Sarah Morrison had taken a dangerous turn. Cafe Vittoria in the North End was one of Boston's oldest establishments, a small Italian cafe that had served the community for over 100 years. With its walls decorated with old photographs of Italy and the constant aroma of strong espresso, it was the kind of place where important conversations happened in whispers, protected by the constant noise of the coffee machine. and the coming and going of morning customers. Vinny arrived punctually at 7, finding Sal already seated at a table in the back, with 2 steaming cups of coffee in front of him. The ex-detective looked like he had aged years since their last conversation, with deep dark circles and a tense expression that Vinny had rarely seen. "You look terrible," observed Vinny, sitting down and taking one of the cups. "I have reasons for that," replied Sal, lowering his voice. "Sarah Morrison is dead, Vinny. They found her body last night at the harbor." Although Vinny had already suspected this possibility, hearing the confirmation was like a punch to the stomach. He took a sip of the bitter coffee, using the time to process the information and its implications. "How? Officially? Accidental drowning. But I saw the body before the police arrived. There were signs of violence, evidence that she was tortured before dying." Sal paused, looking around to make sure no one was listening. Mickey O'Sullivan doesn't just settle for killing. He likes to send a message. Vinny clenched his fists under the table. He had seen a lot of violence in his career, had ordered actions that resulted in deaths, but there was something particularly revolting about the torture of a desperate woman who was just trying to survive. "There's more," continued Sal. "The police are treating it as a closed case. Apparently someone with influence wants this to disappear quickly. Mickey has contacts in the police? Not Mickey, someone bigger." Sal leaned forward, his voice becoming almost inaudible. "Vinny, I think Sarah Morrison knew something important enough for powerful people to want her dead." Vinny's mind raced, connecting dots that didn't yet form a complete picture. "What did you find out about the boy?" "This is where it gets really strange." Sal took an envelope from his coat's inner pocket. "I got access to Sarah's personal files. She had a safety deposit box at a bank in Cambridge. I managed to look at the contents before it was sealed by the police." Sal slid the envelope across the table. Inside, Vinny found copies of documents that made his blood freeze. Fake birth certificates, passports with different names, and photographs of Sarah with men he recognized as important figures in organized crime from other cities. "Sarah Morrison wasn't who she said she was," explained Sal. "Her real name was Sarah Kowalski. She was in the Witness Protection Program." Vinny almost dropped his coffee cup. The Witness Protection Program was administered by the feds, used to protect people who had testified against criminal organizations. If Sarah was in the program, it meant she had betrayed someone very powerful. And Tommy? He's not her biological son. According to the documents, she adopted him informally about 2 years ago when he was 6. There are no records of who his real parents are. The revelation hit Vinny like lightning. Tommy wasn't just an orphan. He was a child without known identity, protected by a woman who had lived under a false identity. The complexity of the situation was multiplying exponentially. "Who did she betray?" asked Vinny. "I'm still investigating, but from the photographs and documents it seems she had connections with the Marconi family from Providence. You know their reputation." Vinny knew very well. The Marconi family controlled Rhode Island with an iron fist, and they were known for their brutality against traitors. If Sarah had testified against them, her death wasn't only inevitable, but also a warning to others who might consider cooperating with authorities. "Sal, I want you to stop the investigation now. Burn everything you discovered and forget this conversation happened." "Vinny, it's not a suggestion." Vinny's voice carried all the authority of his years as a boss. "If the Marconis are involved in this, you don't want to be on their radar." Sal nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had survived so long in Boston's underworld, precisely by knowing when to back down. Vinny returned home with a turbulent mind. How was he going to tell Tommy that his mother was dead? And more importantly, how was he going to protect the boy from the dangers he now knew existed? When he arrived at the mansion, he found Tommy in the kitchen with Maria, helping her prepare chocolate cookies. The boy was laughing at something Maria had said, and for a moment, Vinny could see what it would be like to have a normal family, without the dangers and complications of his life in crime. "Mr. Vinny!" exclaimed Tommy upon seeing him. "Mrs. Maria is teaching me how to make cookies. Want to try one?" Vinny forced a smile, accepting the still warm cookie Tommy offered him. It's delicious, champ. Maria studied her husband's face, immediately recognizing the signs of tension. They had been married long enough for her to know when he was carrying bad news. Tommy, how about you go watch television in the living room? The cookies will be ready in a few minutes, suggested Maria. After Tommy left the kitchen, Maria turned to Vinny with an expectant expression. What happened? Vinny told everything in a low voice, watching Maria's expression change from concern to horror, and finally to fierce determination. When he finished, she was gripping the counter edge so tightly that her knuckles were white. That poor child, whispered Maria. He has no idea about any of this, does he? None. To him, Sarah was just his mother and she disappeared. He doesn't know about false identities, protection programs, or criminal families. Vincent, we can't simply hand him over to the authorities now. If the Marconis find out where he is, I know. Vinny ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he made when under extreme pressure. But keeping him here is also dangerous. If they find out I'm protecting him, so what do we do? Before Vinny could answer, the kitchen phone rang. Maria answered, but her expression immediately changed to one of alarm. Vincent, it's for you. He said he's Mickey O'Sullivan. Vinny felt his blood freeze. Mickey calling directly to his house could only mean one thing. He knew about Tommy. Torino, said Vinny upon answering, keeping his voice neutral. Vinny, my old friend, came the Irish voice from the other end of the line, loaded with false cordiality. I heard you found something that belongs to me. I don't know what you're talking about, Mickey. Of course you do. A blonde little boy about 8 years old. Son of a woman who owed me money. Money that still hasn't been paid, by the way. Vinny looked at Maria, who was listening to the conversation with growing alarm. And if I knew about something like that, well, I'd say you have something that doesn't belong to you. And I always recover what's mine, Vinny. Always. The threat was clear, but Vinny wasn't a man to be easily intimidated. Mickey, you're stepping on dangerous territory. I suggest you reconsider your position. Dangerous territory? Mickey laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Vinny, you may be the king of the North End, but Southie is my kingdom. And that boy has information I need. What information? That's between me and him. But I'll give you 24 hours to deliver the boy. After that, I'll come get him personally. The line went dead, leaving Vinny with the sound of his own heart beating in his ears. Mickey O'Sullivan had just declared war, and Tommy was at the center of the conflict. What did he want? Asked Maria, although she already knew the answer from the tone of the conversation. Tommy. He thinks the boy knows something about Sarah. At that moment, Tommy appeared in the kitchen doorway, his blue eyes shining with childish curiosity. Are the cookies ready? Vinny looked at the boy. So innocent, so oblivious to the danger surrounding him, and made a decision that would change everything. Tommy, I need to talk to you about your mother. They sat in the living room with Tommy on the sofa between Vinny and Maria. The fireplace was lit, creating a cozy atmosphere that contrasted with the gravity of the conversation that was about to come. Tommy, began Vinny carefully, I have some news about your mother. Difficult news. Tommy's face immediately darkened. She's dead, isn't she? The direct question caught Vinny off guard. How did you? I knew something bad had happened, said Tommy, his voice surprisingly calm for an 8-year-old child. My mom would never leave me alone unless she had no choice. And those men who came to the house, they were very bad. Vinny nodded slowly. Yes, Tommy, your mother died. I'm sorry. To the surprise of both adults, Tommy didn't cry. Instead, he just nodded as if confirming something he had known for days. She told me once that if something happened to her, I should only trust good people, said Tommy, looking directly at Vinny. Are you a good person, Mr. Vinny? The simple question carried immense weight. Vinny had done many questionable things in his life, had made decisions that cost lives and destroyed families. But looking at that child, he knew he wanted to be the good person Tommy needed him to be. I'm trying to be, replied Vinny honestly, and I promise I'll protect you, no matter what happens. Even if it's dangerous, especially if it's dangerous. Tommy nodded, satisfied with the answer. So I'm going to stay with you. Maria took the boy's hand. If you want to, dear. We would very much like you to stay. I want to. said Tommy simply. "You're the first real family I've ever had." That night after Tommy went to sleep, Vinny made a series of calls. He summoned his most trusted men, increased the house's security, and began planning a response to Mickey O'Sullivan's threat. If Mickey wanted war, he would have war. But Tommy Morrison, or whatever his real name was under the Torino family's protection now, and Vinny would protect his new family with the same ferocity with which he had built his empire. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering Boston with a white blanket that hid the dangers moving in the city's shadows. The battle for Tommy's future was just beginning, and before it ended, many lives would be changed forever. The morning of the fourth day brought with it a palpable tension that permeated every corner of the Torino mansion. Vinny had spent the night awake, coordinating the house's security and planning his response to Mickey O'Sullivan's threat. When the sun rose over Beacon Hill, the property was already discreetly surrounded by armed men strategically positioned, some in the gardens, others in cars parked on adjacent streets, all communicating through low-frequency radios. Tommy woke up knowing nothing about the military operation that had unfolded around him during the night. For him, it was just another day in the most beautiful house he had ever lived in, with people who treated him with more affection than any adult in his short life. He came down for breakfast wearing new clothes Maria had bought the day before, jeans that fit perfectly, and a navy blue t-shirt that highlighted his eyes. "Good morning, family," said Tommy cheerfully upon entering the kitchen, an expression that made both Vinny and Maria smile despite the tension. Maria had prepared pancakes with maple syrup, crispy bacon, and fresh orange juice. She watched Tommy eat with the healthy appetite of a child who finally felt safe, but her eyes occasionally drifted to the window, where she could see the discreet silhouette of one of Vinny's men patrolling the garden. "Tommy," said Vinny, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, "today we're going to stay home. Maybe we can watch some movies, play some games. What do you think?" "That would be great," replied Tommy, stacking another pancake on his plate. "Can I choose the movie?" "Of course you can, champ." What Tommy didn't know was that Vinny had canceled all his meetings and external activities. Until the situation with Mickey was resolved, he wouldn't leave the house, and Tommy definitely wouldn't leave his side. Around 10 in the morning, Vinny's office phone rang. It was Tony Marcelli, his right-hand man and one of the most reliable men in his organization. Tony had grown up in the North End, son of Italian immigrants, and had worked for Vinny for more than 15 years. His loyalty was absolute, and his efficiency in delicate situations was legendary. "Boss, we have movement," reported Tony in code. "The Irishman is gathering his men. We counted at least 12 cars leaving his territory in the last 2 hours. Direction? Various. Some came to Beacon Hill, others are circling the North End. He's mapping our strong points." Vinny wasn't surprised. Mickey O'Sullivan was many things: brutal, ruthless, violent, but he wasn't stupid. He knew that directly attacking Vinny's house would be suicide, so he was looking for weak points, opportunities, ways to pressure Vinny to voluntarily hand over Tommy. "Reinforce security at the restaurants and offices," ordered Vinny. "And Tony, if any of Mickey's men are seen near my grandchildren's school, you have authorization to act." "Understood, boss." Vinny hung up the phone and leaned back in the leather chair. Mickey was escalating the situation, transforming what could have been a simple negotiation into a territorial war. But Vinny had built his empire by being smarter than his enemies, not just more violent. He picked up the phone again and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. On the other end of the line, a familiar voice answered. "Federal Prosecutor's Office. I need to speak with Assistant Prosecutor Rebecca Chen. Tell her it's Vincent Torino." There was a long pause, followed by hold music. Rebecca Chen was one of Massachusetts' most respected federal prosecutors, known for her unwavering integrity and determination to combat organized crime. She and Vinny had faced each other in court several times over the years, developing mutual respect despite being on opposite sides of the law. "Mr. Torino," came Rebecca's voice after a few minutes. "This is a surprise. To what do I owe this unexpected call? I need information about the Witness Protection Program, specifically about a woman named Sarah Kowalski. who was living as Sarah Morrison. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mr. Torino, you know I can't discuss active cases or classified information. She's dead, Rebecca. Murdered 3 days ago. And there's a child involved who may be in danger. A child? An 8-year-old boy. He was under Sarah's care when she was killed. Now there are people trying to get to him, and I need to know why. Rebecca Chen was a mother of 2 small children, and Vinny knew that mentioning a child in danger would touch a sensitive chord. There was another long pause before she responded. I can't discuss this over the phone. If you really have information about the death of a protected witness, you need to come to my office. I can't leave home now. The situation is complicated. Then I'll send someone to you. But Mr. Torino, if this is some kind of game, it's not a game, Rebecca. An innocent child is in danger, and I'm the only thing between her and people who want to hurt her. 2 hours later, a black government sedan stopped in front of the Torino mansion. Rebecca Chen got out of the car, accompanied by 2 federal agents, her professional posture contrasting with the casual elegance of her dark gray suit. At 38, she had become one of Boston's most feared prosecutors by criminals, known for her meticulous preparation and refusal to make deals that compromise justice. Vinny received her at the door, wearing casual clothes that made him look more like a successful businessman than an organized crime boss. Rebecca, thank you for coming. Mr. Torino, she replied formally, following him to the office. I hope you have a good reason for bringing me here. Vinny closed the office door and offered seats to Rebecca and her agents. The environment was impressive. Shelves full of books, dark wood furniture, and paintings worth more than most people earned in a year. But Rebecca wasn't there to admire the decoration. I'll be direct, began Vinny. Sarah Kowalski was in the witness protection program. She was murdered by Mickey O'Sullivan, probably on orders from someone bigger. And now Mickey wants the child who was under her care. Rebecca exchanged glances with her agents before responding. How do you know about Sarah Kowalski? Because I found the boy abandoned on the roadside 4 days ago. He was crying, cold, hungry. I brought him home and started investigating who he was. And where is this child now? Safe, under my protection. Rebecca leaned forward. Mr. Torino, if you really have a child who is under the care of a protected witness, she needs to be handed over to federal authorities immediately so you can put her in a foster family where the Marconis can find her. Vinny shook his head. Not going to happen. The Marconis? Rebecca straightened in her chair. How do you know about the Marconis? Because I know how this world works, Rebecca. Sarah testified against them, was placed in the protection program, but somehow they found her. And now they want the boy because they think he knows something. Rebecca remained silent for a long moment, processing the information. Finally, she sighed and leaned back in her chair. Sarah Kowalski was the Marconi family's accountant in Providence, she said carefully. She had access to all their financial records, bank accounts, investments, money laundering operations. When she decided to cooperate with us, she brought enough evidence to dismantle the entire operation. And the boy? Tommy isn't her biological son. She adopted him informally when his real mother, a drug addict who worked for the Marconis, died of an overdose. Sarah became attached to the child and took him with her when she entered the program. Vinny nodded, the puzzle pieces finally fitting together. So Tommy may have seen or heard things when he was with the Marconis, things that could incriminate them even more. It's possible. Children sometimes observe and remember details that adults ignore. And that's why Mickey wants him. It's not about money. It's about silencing a potential witness. Rebecca nodded gravely. Mr. Torino, I understand your concern for the child's safety, but she needs to be under federal protection. We have resources. You had resources to protect Sarah too, interrupted Vinny. How did that work out? The comment hit its target. Rebecca knew that the witness protection program, while generally effective, wasn't foolproof. There were leaks, corruption, human errors that sometimes cost lives. What are you proposing? Asked Rebecca. Leave the boy with me until you arrest the Marconis and Mickey O'Sullivan. I can protect him better than any federal program. That's impossible. You're a known criminal, Mr. Torino. We can't officially—" "Then do it unofficially," said Vinny. "You know where he is. You know he's safe. When you get the Marconis, I'll hand the boy over to you." Rebecca looked at her agents, who remained expressionless. It was an unprecedented situation. An organized crime boss offering protection to a federal witness against other criminals. "I need to discuss this with my superiors," said Rebecca finally. "Do it quickly," replied Vinny. "Mickey gave me 24 hours and 14 have already passed." After Rebecca and her agents left, Vinny went upstairs to check on Tommy. He found the boy in the game room assembling a 1,000-piece puzzle with Maria. The scene was so normal, so domestic, that for a moment Vinny could forget about the dangers surrounding them. "How's it going there, champ?" asked Vinny, sitting on the floor next to Tommy. "We're building a castle," said Tommy excitedly. "Mrs. Maria said when we finish, we can start another one." Vinny looked at Maria, who smiled sadly. Both knew that Tommy was living in a temporary safety bubble, protected from the brutal reality unfolding around him. "Mr. Vinny," said Tommy suddenly, "can I ask a question?" "Sure." "Why are there men with guns in the garden?" The question caught Vinny off guard. He had underestimated Tommy's observational capacity. "How do you know about that?" "I saw from my bedroom window. They're trying to hide, but they're not very good at it." Tommy placed a puzzle piece in the right place. "They're here to protect me, aren't they?" Vinny exchanged a glance with Maria before responding. "Yes, Tommy. There are some bad people who might try to hurt you, so we're taking precautions." "Because of my mother?" "Yes." Tommy nodded, accepting the explanation with the surprising maturity he had shown since the first day. "That's okay. I feel safe here with you." That afternoon, the phone rang again. It was Tony Marcelli, and his voice carried urgency. "Boss, we have a problem. Mickey just kidnapped Sal Benedetto's daughter." Vinny felt his blood freeze. Sal had a 16-year-old daughter, a bright girl who dreamed of studying medicine. Mickey had just escalated the situation to a completely new level. Where? She was leaving school. 2 witnesses saw her being forced into a car. Mickey left a message. He'll trade the girl for the boy. Vinny closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision he would have to make. Sal Benedetto had been loyal to him for years, had risked his life to get information about Sarah Morrison. Now his daughter was paying the price for that loyalty. "Boss, what do we do?" "Gather the men," said Vinny finally. "We're going to get the girl." "And the boy?" Vinny looked out the office window, where he could see Tommy playing in the garden with Maria, completely oblivious to the fact that his presence had just put an innocent teenager in mortal danger. "The boy stays with me," said Vinny, "no matter what happens." The war had officially begun, and before it ended, Boston streets would be painted red. But Vinny Torino had made a promise to an orphaned child, and he would keep that promise, even if it cost everything he had built. Night fell over Boston like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a tension that could be felt in the streets of the North End and South Boston. It was the 5th night since Vinny had found Tommy on the road, but it seemed like an eternity had passed. The city was on the brink of a territorial war that could redefine the balance of power in Boston's underworld. And at the center of it all was an 8-year-old child who had no idea of the chaos his presence had unleashed. In the Torino mansion, Tommy was having dinner in the kitchen with Maria, completely oblivious to the fact that his future was being decided in whispered conversations and secret meetings throughout the city. He had spent the day playing, watching television, and helping Maria cook, living the normal life of a child who finally felt safe and loved. "Mrs. Maria," said Tommy, pushing the last pieces of lasagna around his plate. "Can I ask something?" "Of course, dear," replied Maria, noticing that Tommy had developed the habit of asking serious questions during meals. "If I stay with you forever, does that mean you'll be my real parents?" The simple question hit Maria like a punch to the heart. She looked at that boy, with his messy blonde hair and blue eyes full of hope, and saw not just an orphaned child, but the son she and Vinny never knew they wanted. "If you want us to be," replied Maria, her voice slightly choked, "we would very much like that." "I want to," said Tommy simply. "I never had a real family before. My mom, Sarah, she loved me, but she was always afraid. Here I feel safe." Maria got up and hugged Tommy, feeling tears form in her eyes. "You'll always be safe with us, Tommy. Always." Meanwhile, in the office, Vinny was coordinating the riskiest operation of his career. His desk was covered with maps of South Boston, photographs of Mickey O'Sullivan's known locations, and intelligence reports his men had collected throughout the day. Tony Marcelli was sitting across the table, along with 3 other of his most trusted lieutenants. "The girl is being held at Mickey's warehouse near the harbor," reported Tony. 2 guards in front, probably 2 more in back. Mickey is there personally, along with at least 6 of his men. "Weapons?" asked Vinny. "Heavy. They know we're going to try to rescue her." Vinny studied the map, calculating approach angles and escape routes. Mickey's warehouse was in an isolated industrial area, surrounded by other abandoned warehouses and with limited access. It was a fortress, chosen specifically to make a rescue almost impossible. "It's a trap," said Frank Rossini, one of Vinny's most experienced lieutenants. "Mickey wants us to try to rescue the girl. He'll be waiting for us." "I know," replied Vinny, "but we can't let an innocent child die because of us." "What if we hand over the boy?" suggested another lieutenant. "Mickey gets what he wants, we get the girl back. Everyone's happy." Vinny turned to the man with an expression that made everyone in the room step back. "Tommy Morrison is under my protection. Anyone who suggests handing him over can leave my organization right now." The silence that followed was heavy. Vinny's men had seen him make difficult decisions before, but they had never seen him so emotionally invested in protecting someone who wasn't blood family. "Boss," said Tony carefully, "we're not questioning your decision, but we need a plan that doesn't result in all of us dead." Vinny nodded, appreciating his men's loyalty. "We have a plan, but it's going to require thinking outside the box." He picked up the phone and dialed a number that surprised everyone in the room. "Prosecutor Chen? It's Vincent Torino. I need a favor." On the other end of the line, Rebecca Chen was in her office working late, preparing the case against the Marconi family. Vinny's call caught her by surprise. "Mr. Torino, it's almost midnight. What do you want?" "Mickey O'Sullivan kidnapped an innocent teenager to force me to hand over Tommy. I need your help to rescue her." "Mr. Torino, I can't get involved in—" "Rebecca," interrupted Vinny, using her first name for the first time. "You have children. Imagine if it were your daughter being held by a psychopath who will kill her regardless of what I do." There was a long pause. Rebecca Chen was known for her integrity, but also for her compassion. The idea of a child in danger touched something deep in her soul. "What are you proposing?" "A joint operation. Your agents and my men. We rescue the girl and arrest Mickey at the same time." "That's impossible. I can't authorize federal agents to work with—" "Then don't authorize it officially," said Vinny. "But you know Mickey O'Sullivan is a violent criminal who needs to be taken off the streets. And you know an innocent girl will die if we don't act." Rebecca remained silent for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she sighed. "Where and when?" An hour later, in an abandoned parking lot in Charlestown, a surreal scene unfolded. Federal agents in bulletproof vests whispered with members of the Torino crime family, planning an operation that violated all the rules on both sides. Rebecca Chen was there personally, along with 6 special agents. Vinny had brought Tony and 8 of his best men. "The plan is simple," explained Rebecca, pointing to a map of the warehouse. "My agents enter through the front with legitimate search warrants. That will distract Mickey and his men. You enter through the back and rescue the girl." "And then?" asked Tony. "Then you disappear before my agents see you," replied Rebecca. Officially, this operation never happened. Vinny studied Rebecca's face. "Why are you doing this?" "Because sometimes real justice is more important than legal justice," she replied. "And because an innocent child shouldn't pay for adults' sins." At 2 a.m, the operation began. Federal agents approached the warehouse from the front, their sirens cutting through the silence of the industrial night. Inside the building, Mickey O'Sullivan and his men ran to the front windows, trying to understand what was happening. "Federal police!" shouted Rebecca through a megaphone. "We have search warrants! Come out with your hands up!" Meanwhile, Vinny and his men silently approached from the back of the building. Tony had cut the barbed wire fence, and they moved like shadows among the piles of containers and abandoned equipment. Inside the warehouse, Mickey was panicking. He hadn't expected the feds to show up, and his mind raced trying to figure out how they had discovered his location. "Boss, what do we do?" asked one of his men. "Kill the girl and get out through the back," replied Mickey coldly. "We can't leave witnesses." He turned to where Lisa Benedetto was tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse. The 16-year-old girl was terrified but trying to maintain composure. Her eyes were red from crying, but she hadn't broken. Mickey drew his pistol and pointed it at Lisa's head. "Sorry, sweetheart. Nothing personal." It was at that moment that the warehouse lights went out. Vinny had cut the electrical power, plunging the building into total darkness. In the chaos that followed, his men invaded through the back doors, using night vision goggles to navigate in the darkness. The shootout that followed was brief but intense. Mickey's men, blind in the darkness, shot randomly, while Vinny's men moved with surgical precision. In less than 3 minutes, it was all over. When the emergency lights finally came on, Mickey O'Sullivan was on the ground, wounded but alive. 5 of his men were dead, and the other 2 had surrendered. Lisa Benedetto was unharmed, protected by Tony Marcelli, who had reached her in the first seconds of the operation. "It's all right, girl," whispered Tony, cutting the ropes that bound her. "You're safe now." Vinny approached Mickey, who was bleeding from a shoulder wound. The Irishman looked up with a mixture of pain and hatred. "This doesn't end here, Torino," growled Mickey. "The Marconis will come after you. They'll come after the boy." "Leave the Marconis to me," replied Vinny calmly. "You won't be around to see what happens to them." At that moment, Rebecca Chen and her agents entered the warehouse. They found Mickey and his men wounded or dead, but no sign of Vinny's men, who had disappeared into the night like ghosts. "Mickey O'Sullivan," said Rebecca, putting handcuffs on the wounded Irishman. "You're under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, and a long list of other crimes." Mickey laughed bitterly. "You think this will stop anything? Torino still has the boy, and the Marconis still want him." "The Marconis have bigger problems to worry about," replied Rebecca. "We just received authorization to arrest the entire family. It seems someone provided additional evidence about their operations." In fact, Vinny had handed over all the information Sal Benedetto had collected about the connections between Mickey and the Marconis. It was enough information to dismantle the entire criminal network. 2 hours later, Vinny was back home, checking on Tommy, who was sleeping peacefully in his room. The boy had gone through the entire operation without knowing his life had been in danger, protected by childhood's ignorance. Maria was waiting for Vinny in the kitchen with a hot cup of tea and a look of concern. "Is everything resolved?" she asked. "Mickey is arrested. Sal's girl is safe, and the Marconis will be arrested before dawn," replied Vinny, sitting heavily in the chair. "Tommy is safe. And us? What happens now?" Vinny looked at the woman who had been his companion for more than 20 years. The woman who had accepted an orphaned child into their home without question, who had risked everything to protect a boy they barely knew. "Now we become a real family," he said. "I'm going to start transferring the legitimate businesses to our children and gradually retire from illegal activities. Tommy deserves to grow up in a safe environment." "Are you sure? That means giving up a lot of power." "Maria, in the last 5 days, that boy has taught me more about what really matters in life than all my years in crime. Power means nothing if you don't have family to protect." The next morning, Tommy woke up to find Vinny and Maria in the kitchen, preparing a special breakfast. There were heart-shaped pancakes, crispy bacon, and fresh orange juice served in crystal glasses. "What are we celebrating?" asked Tommy, sitting at the table. "We're celebrating our family," said Maria, kissing the top of Tommy's head. "Our family." Vinny sat next to Tommy and picked up an envelope from the table. "Tommy, Maria and I would like to adopt you officially. That means you would be our real son, legally and forever." Tommy looked at the envelope, then at Vinny and Maria, his blue eyes shining with tears of happiness. "Does that mean I can call you Dad and Mom?" "If you want to," replied Vinny. His own voice choked. "I want to," said Tommy, jumping from his chair to hug both of them. "I want to very much." 6 months later, the adoption was finalized. Tommy Morrison officially became Tommy Torino, son of Vincent and Maria Torino. The ceremony was small, held in a friendly judge's office, with only the closest relatives present. Vinny had fulfilled his promise to gradually step away from organized crime. He transferred most of his illegal operations to others, keeping only the legitimate businesses that could support his family. It wasn't an easy transition. There was resistance from some of his men, attempts by other groups to take his territory. But he navigated through everything with the wisdom of decades of experience. Tommy adapted to his new life with the remarkable resilience of children. He was enrolled in a prestigious private school, where he excelled academically and made friends easily. He never asked about Vinny's past, simply accepting that his new father was a businessman who loved him unconditionally. On a spring night, 1 year after finding Tommy on the road, Vinny was sitting in his office, looking at family photographs. There were photos from adoption day, Tommy's first day of school, vacations they had taken together. In each image, Tommy smiled with the pure joy of a child who had finally found his place in the world. Maria entered the office carrying 2 cups of coffee. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how a 5-second decision can change your entire life," replied Vinny. "If I hadn't stopped the car that night—" "But you did stop," said Maria, sitting on the arm of Vinny's chair. "And you saved not only Tommy's life, but ours too." "How so?" "Vincent, in the last 20 years, I've watched you become increasingly harder, more distant. Work was consuming your soul. But Tommy, he brought back the man I fell in love with." Vinny took Maria's hand, intertwining their fingers. "He saved us, didn't he? That little boy saved us." At that moment, Tommy appeared in the office doorway, wearing his pajamas and carrying a book. "Dad, can you read to me before bed?" "Of course, champ," replied Vinny, getting up from his chair. "What book did you choose today?" "It's about a pirate who finds treasure," said Tommy excitedly. But in the end, he discovers that the real treasure was the family he found. Vinny smiled, noticing the irony. "Sounds like a great story." As they went upstairs together, Vinny reflected on the journey that had brought them there. He had started as a man who built his power through fear and violence, but had become a father who built his legacy through love and protection. Outside, Boston continued its nightlife, with all its complexities and dangers. But inside the Torino mansion, a family had found the peace that comes from knowing that no matter what the outside world brought, they would face it together. Tommy Morrison had come into their lives as a lost boy crying on the road, but he had become Tommy Torino, beloved son, and had transformed a crime boss into a devoted father. Sometimes redemption comes in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes saving another person is the only way to save yourself. The story that had begun with tears on a cold winter night had become a saga of love, family, and second chances. And as Vinny read to Tommy about pirates and treasures, both knew they had found the greatest treasure of all, each other.